Under the cool light of a crisp autumn morning, an ancient courthouse stands as a silent witness to secrets and surprises that defy all expectations. Standing there, a 10-year-old girl with auburn hair and determined blue eyes. But it's not the child who causes every person in the room to gasp. It's what walks beside her. The animal, with its gleaming tawny coat and piercing amber eyes, strides by her side as if it were a cherished family member rather than a creature of the wild. Animals are not permitted in this courtroom, the judge declares. The judge, a seasoned pillar of the law, is caught between skepticism and wonder as he listens to the girl's impassioned plea. A plea rooted in loss, legacy, and the belief that sometimes nature chooses its own family. Sometimes the rules must be broken to serve a higher purpose. Join us on a journey into a world where the rules are rewritten, and where every heartbeat in that courtroom pulses with a mystery that is as profound as it is unexpected. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The Jefferson County Courthouse had seen its fair share of unusual cases throughout its 100-year history, but nothing quite like what unfolded on that crisp autumn morning. The ancient maple trees outside the stately brick building had begun to shed their crimson and gold leaves, and the morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge William Anderson, a man with 40 years of legal experience etched into the lines of his weathered face, peered over his wire-rimmed glasses at the day's docket. After 3 decades on the bench, he thought he'd seen it all: custody battles, property disputes, civil disagreements that had festered into bitter lawsuits. But case number 47-29B was unlike anything he'd encountered before. Walker versus State Wildlife Commission, appeal for custody of wildlife. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the heavy oak doors swung open. The usual routine of the court was disrupted by a collective gasp that rippled through the room. Standing in the doorway was a small figure, a girl no more than 10 years old, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a simple blue dress that matched her determined eyes. But it wasn't the child that caused the stir, it was what walked beside her. Padding silently at her side was a bobcat, its tawny coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, tufted ears alert, and amber eyes surveying the room with quiet intelligence. The animal wasn't caged or leashed, but walked freely next to the child, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Order. Order in the court. Judge Anderson's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Security officers tensed, hands hovering near their weapons, uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented situation. "Young lady," the judge addressed the girl, his voice stern but not unkind. "I believe there's been some misunderstanding. Animals, especially wild ones, are not permitted in this courtroom." The girl stepped forward, her small shoulders squared with resolve. "Your Honor, my name is Sarah Walker. This is Max, and he's the reason I'm here today." Her voice was clear and unwavering, surprising in its maturity for someone so young. "I received the court summons. I understand I'm not supposed to have a lawyer, but I'm representing myself in this appeal." Judge Anderson's eyebrows rose in surprise. In his 4 decades of legal practice, he'd never encountered a child acting as her own counsel. "And where are your parents, Miss Walker?" A shadow passed over Sarah's face. "My mother passed away when I was 4, Your Honor. My father." Her voice caught slightly, but she composed herself with a deep breath. "My father died 3 months ago. My Aunt Clara is my guardian now, but she's waiting outside. She said this was my fight." The judge's expression softened slightly. "I see. And she allowed you to bring a wild animal into a public building." "Max isn't dangerous, Your Honor," Sarah replied, glancing down at the bobcat who sat perfectly still beside her, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face. He's family. From the prosecution table, a man in a crisp government suit rose to his feet. Richard Thompson, the regional director of the State Wildlife Commission, cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may, this is precisely the issue at hand. That animal, he pointed accusingly at Max, causing several spectators to flinch as if expecting the bobcat to lunge, is a wild predator, not a pet or family member. It belongs in a wildlife sanctuary or its natural habitat, not in a residential home with a child. The bobcat's ears twitched at the man's sharp tone, but otherwise, it remained completely calm, surprising everyone in the courtroom. Its behavior was far from what anyone would expect from a wild animal in such an unfamiliar and tense environment. Mr. Thompson, Judge Anderson addressed the official. While I appreciate your concern, I'd like to hear what Miss Walker has to say. This is, after all, her appeal. He turned back to Sarah. Young lady, do you understand why the State Wildlife Commission wants to relocate your Max? Sarah nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. They believe wild animals should remain wild, and that keeping Max is dangerous for both him and me. She took a small step forward. But they don't understand. Max isn't just any bobcat, and our situation isn't ordinary. Enlighten us, then, the judge said, settling back in his chair, genuine curiosity replacing his initial alarm. Sarah took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on Max's head, who leaned slightly into her touch. My father was Daniel Walker. He worked for the Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Center in the Shenandoah Valley. He dedicated his life to saving animals, rehabilitating them, and releasing them back to the wild. Recognition flickered in Judge Anderson's eyes. The wildlife rescuer who died in the Jefferson Forest fire last summer. Sarah nodded, her blue eyes growing misty. 3 months ago, there was a wildfire that spread through the eastern ridge. Dad got a call that several animals were trapped. He went in even though the fire was getting worse. Her voice grew quieter. He managed to rescue several animals, but then he found Max's mother. She was badly injured, and there was a tiny cub next to her. That was Max. The courtroom was completely silent now, every person hanging on the young girl's words. Dad tried to save them both, but the fire was closing in. Sarah swallowed hard. He didn't make it out. The firefighters found him the next day. He had wrapped Max in his jacket to protect him from the smoke and heat. His mother didn't survive. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained resolute. Your Honor, while this is undoubtedly a tragic story, it doesn't change the fact that bobcats are wild animals that require specialized care and environments. They can be unpredictable and dangerous, especially as they mature. Sarah's eyes flashed with determination. Max was only 3 weeks old when Dad found him. I've bottle-fed him, watched him grow, taught him how to be gentle. He's never shown any aggression toward people. She looked down at the bobcat with unmistakable affection. Dad was teaching me everything about wildlife rescue. He always said that sometimes, in very special cases, animals choose to stay with us. The judge considered her words carefully. Miss Walker, while your story is touching, the law is clear about ownership of native wildlife. What makes you believe an exception should be made in this case? Sarah straightened up. Because Max isn't a pet, Your Honor. He's free to come and go as he pleases. We have 10 acres of land that borders the national forest. He has a cat door to the outdoors, and he often goes into the woods to explore. But he always comes back. She reached into a small backpack she carried and pulled out a binder. I've documented everything about Max's care, his diet, his health checkups with Dr. Holloway at the Wildlife Center, his behavior patterns. Dad taught me that proper documentation is important in wildlife rehabilitation. Judge Anderson gestured for the bailiff to bring him the binder. As he flipped through the meticulously kept records, complete with photographs, notes, and even signed statements from veterinarians, his expression grew increasingly impressed. I've also brought something else, Your Honor, Sarah continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. This is my father's last will and testament. In it, he specifically requested that Max remain in my care, with Aunt Clara's supervision, of course. He believed that Max had formed a special bond with me. As the judge examined the document, Thompson rose again. Your Honor, while the court might consider the deceased's wishes, they cannot override state wildlife regulations designed to protect both people and animals. Miss Walker is only 10 years old. Regardless of her father's training, she cannot possibly provide appropriate care for a predator species. Mr. Thompson, Sarah responded before the judge could speak. Would you like to see how Max responds to me? The wildlife official looked momentarily taken aback, but nodded curtly. Sarah turned to the Bobcat and whispered something that was inaudible to the rest of the courtroom. Immediately, Max stood, walked several paces away, and sat down, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Lie down, she said softly. The Bobcat immediately complied, stretching out on the courtroom floor. Roll over. Again, Max obeyed instantly, rolling onto his back and then back to his stomach. What happened next stunned everyone in the courtroom. Sarah moved her hand in a barely perceptible gesture, and Max walked to the prosecutor's table, sat beside a very stiff Mr. Thompson, and gently placed one paw on the table's edge, looking expectantly at the man. He wants to shake your hand, Sarah explained with the hint of a smile. Dad taught him that's how we greet new friends. Thompson looked at the extended paw with a mixture of fear and amazement. After a moment's hesitation, he tentatively touched the Bobcat's paw, earning an approving blink from Max. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the courtroom. As you can see, Your Honor, Sarah continued as Max returned to her side. Max understands commands and is well socialized. He's not a danger to anyone. Judge Anderson was about to respond when a commotion erupted outside the courtroom. The doors burst open, and a police officer rushed in, his face flushed with urgency. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the parking garage. A wild animal has been spotted, possibly injured and definitely agitated. Animal control has been called, but they're saying it will take at least 30 minutes for them to arrive. Panic began to spread through the courtroom. What kind of animal? Judge Anderson demanded. A mountain lion, sir. It appears to be wounded and frightened. We've evacuated the area, but it's cornered in the lower level. It's showing signs of aggression toward anyone who approaches. Before anyone could react further, Max suddenly became alert, his ears perked forward, nose testing the air. He let out a low sound, not quite a growl, but a vocalization that clearly indicated he sensed something no human in the room could detect. Sarah's eyes widened. Your Honor, Max can help. She looked at the judge with earnest determination. Please, let me try to calm the mountain lion. Dad taught me how to approach injured wildlife. That's absolutely out of the question, Thompson interjected. This is precisely why wild animals are dangerous and unpredictable. Now we have two predators to deal with. Judge Anderson raised his hand for silence, his gaze fixed on Sarah and Max. The Bobcat remained alert but calm, showing none of the agitation one would expect if he sensed a threat. Instead, he seemed concerned. Against all conventional wisdom and protocol, Judge Anderson made a decision that would later be discussed in legal circles for years to come. Officer, escort Miss Walker and her companion to the parking garage, but maintain a safe distance. At the first sign of danger, you are to remove her immediately. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, the officer replied, though his expression betrayed his doubt about the unusual order. Your Honor, I must protest in the strongest possible terms, Thompson began, but the judge cut him off. Noted, Mr. Thompson. You're welcome to accompany us and observe from a safe distance. The judge stood, removing his robe. Court is temporarily adjourned. We will reconvene after this situation is resolved. The unlikely procession, a small girl, a bobcat, a judge, a wildlife official, and several police officers, made their way through the courthouse corridors and down to the parking garage. The usually busy structure had been evacuated, and an eerie silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound of a police radio. On the lowest level, behind a row of parked cars, lay a mountain lion. The magnificent animal was clearly in distress, a large gash visible on its flank, likely from a fight or perhaps a collision with a vehicle. It growled weakly as it spotted the humans approaching, its tail lashing in warning. "Stay back," Sarah instructed softly. "Max and I need space." To everyone's amazement, the Bobcat didn't show fear or aggression toward the much larger predator. Instead, he stayed close to Sarah, moving slowly and deliberately. "Your Honor," Sarah whispered, "do you have any food in your chambers? Something like beef or chicken?" Judge Anderson dispatched an officer to retrieve his lunch, a roast beef sandwich that he'd been saving for later. When the food arrived, Sarah carefully unwrapped it. Mountain lions, like all cats, are driven by two things when they're hurt: fear and hunger, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to address both." With agonizing slowness, Sarah began to move toward the injured animal, Max at her side. She tore off small pieces of the sandwich and tossed them, creating a trail leading toward the mountain lion. "It's okay," she called softly to the frightened animal. "We're not going to hurt you. Max is a friend, and I'm a friend too." The adults watched in tense silence as the girl and Bobcat inched closer to the dangerous predator. The mountain lion's eyes darted between Sarah, Max, and the scattered food, its growls becoming less frequent as curiosity began to replace fear. When Sarah was about 15 feet away, she stopped and sat down on the concrete floor, making herself appear smaller and less threatening. Max sat beside her, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I'm going to help you," Sarah continued in the same soothing voice she'd used with Max in the courtroom. "You're hurt, and you're scared, but we can make it better." To the astonishment of everyone watching, the mountain lion's aggressive posture gradually relaxed. It sniffed cautiously at the nearest piece of food, then quickly devoured it. Bit by bit, it began to eat the trail of food, gradually moving closer to Sarah. Thompson watched in disbelief. "This is unprecedented," he muttered. "I've worked with wildlife for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." When the mountain lion was about 10 feet away, it suddenly tensed again, a low growl rumbling in its throat as it stared past Sarah at the watching humans. "Please, everyone step back," Sarah requested without turning around. "You're making him nervous." Judge Anderson gestured for everyone to retreat several paces, their eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before them. With the humans at a more comfortable distance, the mountain lion cautiously continued its approach until it had eaten the last piece of food, just 5 feet from Sarah. Then it stopped, its eyes, a deep golden amber, fixed warily on the girl and her Bobcat companion. What happened next left even the most skeptical observers speechless. Max slowly rose and took 2 careful steps toward the mountain lion. The larger cat's ears flattened momentarily, but there was no aggression in its posture, only caution and curiosity. Max made a soft chirping sound, a vocalization that seemed to communicate directly with the injured predator. "He's telling him we want to help," Sarah explained, her voice barely audible. She reached slowly into her backpack and removed a small first aid kit. "Dad always said that animals can sense our intentions. If we're calm and we mean no harm, they can feel it." Over the next 20 minutes, with infinite patience and remarkable courage, Sarah talked soothingly to the mountain lion as she inched closer. Max remained a constant, calming presence, occasionally making those same chirping sounds whenever the larger cat showed signs of anxiety. Eventually, Sarah was close enough to examine the wound. "It's deep, but clean," she announced to the watching adults. "I think he was in a territorial fight with another mountain lion. He needs antibiotics and proper care, but I can clean and bandage it temporarily." With steady hands that belied her age, Sarah cleaned the wound with antiseptic wipes from her kit, applied antibiotic ointment, and managed to place a large bandage over the gash. Throughout the procedure, the mountain lion remained surprisingly calm, flinching occasionally but never showing aggression. "I think he understands we're helping him," Judge Anderson murmured, his voice filled with wonder. When she had finished, Sarah slowly backed away. "He needs proper medical attention. Can someone call Dr. Holloway at the Wildlife Center? He'll know what to do." Within the hour, Dr. James Holloway arrived with a transport cage and tranquilizer equipment, expecting to face a dangerous situation. What he found instead was a mountain lion lying relatively calmly next to a young girl and a bobcat. "Sarah Walker," the veterinarian said, shaking his head in amazement. "Your father would be incredibly proud of you today." With Sarah's help, they were able to sedate the mountain lion with minimal stress and load it safely for transport to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. To everyone's surprise, the mountain lion seemed distressed when separated from Max. "He's bonded with Max," Sarah explained. "Can Max come too? Just for a little while. I think it will help the mountain lion stay calm during recovery." Dr. Holloway looked to Judge Anderson, who was still technically presiding over the custody case for Max. The judge turned to Thompson, whose rigid opposition had visibly softened after witnessing the extraordinary events of the day. "Mr. Thompson, would you consider allowing a temporary delay in your petition while Max assists at the rehabilitation center? It seems we have an unusual situation that may benefit from an unusual solution." Thompson nodded slowly. "I've never seen anything like what I witnessed today. Perhaps there are exceptions to every rule." He looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "Your father taught you well, Miss Walker." At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the mountain lion, now named Liberty by the staff, made a remarkable recovery with Max often lying near his enclosure, providing a strange but effective comfort to the larger cat. Dr. Holloway documented the unusual bond between the two wild felines, noting that Liberty's stress levels were measurably lower when Max was present. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen two different wild species bond this way," Dr. Holloway told Judge Anderson when he visited the center a week later. "It defies everything we think we know about wild animal behavior." Over the following weeks, Liberty's strength returned, and the time came for him to be released back into the wild. A suitable location was chosen in a protected wilderness area far from human habitation, but with abundant prey and water sources. On the day of Liberty's release, Sarah stood with Max, Aunt Clara, Judge Anderson, and even Mr. Thompson at the edge of a beautiful meadow ringed by ancient forest. Dr. Holloway opened the transport cage, and Liberty cautiously emerged, testing the air of freedom. The magnificent cat took several steps into the meadow, then turned to look back at the gathered humans and at Max. For a long moment, Predator and humans regarded each other in silence. Then Liberty threw back his head and let out a powerful roar that echoed through the trees. Not a sound of threat, but almost like a farewell. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched Liberty bound away into the forest, his powerful form soon disappearing among the trees. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Be free and be safe." As they prepared to leave, Judge Anderson placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Your final hearing is scheduled for next week, but I think today has given us all something to think about regarding Max's future." Sarah looked up at him, hope shining through her tears. "Max helped save Liberty. Dad always said that sometimes animals and humans are meant to help each other. That's not interfering with nature, it's being part of it." Thompson, who had remained thoughtfully silent, finally spoke. "Miss Walker, I entered this case believing there were no exceptions to wildlife regulations. Today, I'm not so sure." He knelt to be at eye level with Sarah. "Would you and Max consider working with the Wildlife Commission occasionally? We could use someone with your unusual talents." A week later, in a much less tense courtroom, Judge Anderson issued his ruling. In the matter of Walker versus the State Wildlife Commission, regarding custody of the bobcat known as Max, this court finds that exceptional circumstances warrant an exceptional ruling. He looked directly at Sarah. The bond between Miss Walker and Max is clearly unique, as is Miss Walker's demonstrated ability to care for and understand wildlife. He shuffled his papers and continued. Therefore, I am granting a special wildlife rehabilitator license to Sarah Walker, under the supervision of her guardian Clara Walker and Dr. James Holloway. This license allows Max to remain in her care while also establishing a legal framework for her remarkable gifts to benefit wildlife conservation. The courtroom erupted in applause as Sarah hugged Max, who seemed to understand the significance of the moment, rubbing his head against her arm in his typical display of affection. In the months that followed, Sarah and Max became minor celebrities in wildlife conservation circles. Their story inspired a special youth program at the Rehabilitation Center, where children learned about respectful interaction with wildlife under Sarah's guidance. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Sarah and Max walked the forest paths on their property, they would hear a distant mountain lion's call echoing through the trees. Whether it was Liberty or another of his kind, Sarah liked to think it was a reminder that the boundaries between wild and tame, between animal and human, were perhaps not as rigid as people believed. In a world that too often separated nature from humanity, Sarah and Max had found a middle path, one of mutual respect, understanding, and the profound bond that can form when different species recognize something of themselves in each other.
When retired vet tech Clara Miller discovered a tiny orphaned bobcat kitten trembling under her porch, most people would have called wildlife control. But Clara brought him inside. She named him Jasper, nursed him through those critical early weeks, and inadvertently created something no one could have imagined. A 30-pound bodyguard with spotted fur. Night after night, he curled up beside Clara's pillow. His ears, topped with their distinct black tufts, were like little radar dishes, swiveling to catch the slightest sound. The house settling, a car door down the street, or the most dangerous sound of all, Clara's husband, Mark, trying to get into his own bed. This is the true story of a bobcat who forgot he was a solitary predator and became a full-time protector for the woman who saved his life. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The smoke alarm was shrieking like a banshee when Clara Miller first spotted the tiny bundle of spotted fur huddled beneath her porch steps. The California wildfires had been raging for 3 days, turning the September sky an apocalyptic orange, and evacuation orders had just been lifted for her neighborhood in the foothills outside Sacramento. She'd returned to find her property miraculously untouched, but the surrounding hillsides were charred black as far as she could see. The kitten couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. His oversized ears, topped with distinctive black tufts, swiveled weakly toward her as she approached. His golden eyes were crusted shut, his breathing labored. Clara, a retired veterinary technician, knew immediately what she was looking at. A bobcat kitten, probably orphaned when his mother fled the flames, or worse. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered, carefully wrapping him in the old flannel shirt she kept in her car. The kitten barely struggled, too weak to protest. Mark, her husband of 32 years, was less than thrilled when she burst through the door with her discovery. "Clara, honey, that's a wild animal. You can't just—" "He'll die if I don't help him," she interrupted, already heading for the spare bedroom they'd converted into her home clinic years ago. "Call Fish and Wildlife if you want, but I'm stabilizing him first." Mark sighed, knowing that tone. In 3 decades of marriage, he'd learned to recognize when Clara had made up her mind. He also knew her heart. It was one of the reasons he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. The first few days were touch and go. Clara administered fluid subcutaneously, treated the kitten's smoke-damaged eyes with antibiotic drops, and fed him specialized formula every 2 hours around the clock. She named him Jasper, after the reddish-brown gemstone that matched his coat. By the end of the first week, Jasper's eyes had cleared, revealing stunning amber irises that tracked Clara's every movement. By the second week, he was attempting to play, pouncing on the feather toy she dangled for him. By the third week, something unexpected had happened. Jasper had imprinted on Clara completely. The wildlife rehabber says he's too habituated now, Clara told Mark one evening, Jasper purring loudly in her lap. He wouldn't survive in the wild. They want to place him in a sanctuary, but you want to keep him. Mark finished, watching the Bobcat kitten knead Clara's leg with his oversized paws. He chose me, Mark. When I saved him, something just clicked. I can feel it. Mark studied his wife's face, seeing the same determination that had gotten them through his cancer diagnosis 5 years earlier. The same fierce love that had raised their 2 daughters, now grown with families of their own. "All right," he said finally, "but we're doing this legally. Permits, enclosures, the whole 9 yards." Clara beamed at him, and even Jasper seemed to approve, blinking slowly at Mark before curling up tighter against Clara. What none of them could have predicted was just how seriously Jasper would take his perceived debt to Clara. As he grew from a 5-pound kitten to a 30-pound adolescent, his devotion morphed into something more intense, a self-appointed position as Clara's personal bodyguard. It started subtly. Jasper would position himself between Clara and the door whenever someone knocked. He'd follow her from room to room, never more than a few feet away. But as he reached his full size, smaller than a cougar but considerably larger than a house cat, his protective instincts became impossible to ignore. The first real incident happened when their daughter Jennifer came to visit with her new boyfriend, Todd. "Mom, he's growling at Todd," Jennifer said, equal parts amused and concerned as Jasper planted himself firmly between Clara and the young man. Jasper rumbled, the sound seeming to come from somewhere deep in his chest. His ear tufts were pinned back, his amber eyes locked on Todd with laser focus. "He's just protective," Clara explained, trying to shoo Jasper away. The Bobcat refused to budge. "Jasper, honey, it's okay. This is Jenny's friend." Todd, to his credit, remained perfectly still. "Should I leave?" he asked nervously. No, Clara insisted, finally managing to distract Jasper with a piece of freeze-dried chicken. "He'll warm up to you, eventually." Narrator. He did not warm up to Todd. In fact, Jasper's bodyguard duties only intensified as time went on. His primary post became the master bedroom, where he would sprawl across Clara's side of the bed like a spotted, furry landmine. His ears, those magnificent tufted radar dishes, would swivel constantly, monitoring for threats. Mark discovered the full extent of the problem one night when he got up to use the bathroom. Half asleep, he hadn't noticed Jasper had repositioned himself directly beside the bed. The moment Mark's foot hit the floor, a sound erupted that was part growl, part yowl, and wholly terrifying. Mark leaped backward so fast he knocked over the bedside lamp, which crashed to the floor, which made Jasper growl louder, which made Mark yelp, which woke Clara, who turned on the light to find her husband pressed against the wall and her Bobcat in full defensive posture between them. "Jasper!" Clara scolded, though she was clearly trying not to laugh. "That's just Mark. You know Mark. He lives here." Jasper's expression suggested he was well aware of who Mark was, and that was precisely the problem. The Bobcat maintained eye contact with Mark while slowly backing toward Clara, placing one proprietary paw on her ankle. "I'm being held hostage by a Bobcat in my own bedroom," Mark muttered. "Oh, honey, he's just protective. I know." Mark inched toward the bathroom. "Can you tell him I'm not a threat? Maybe show him my driver's license? Character references?" This became their nightly routine. Mark developed an elaborate system of announcing his movements. "I'm just adjusting my pillow, Jasper. See? Slow movements. No threat here." The Bobcat would watch suspiciously, but usually allowed these minor infractions. The real comedy began during football season. Mark was a passionate 49ers fan, and games could get intense. The first time he jumped up to yell at a bad call, Jasper materialized from nowhere like a spotted ninja. "Holding! That was obviously..." Jasper positioned himself between Mark and Clara, his fur standing on end, tail puffed to twice its normal size. He looked like a very angry feather duster with fangs. "I wasn't yelling at her," Mark protested to the Bobcat. "I was yelling at the TV." Jasper was unmoved by this defense. He maintained his position until Mark sat back down and lowered his voice to what Clara had dubbed library-level Mark. Their friends found the situation endlessly entertaining. During dinner parties, Jasper would patrol the perimeter, paying special attention to anyone who got too close to Clara. Their friend Robert made the mistake of giving Clara a friendly hug hello and found himself nose to nose with 30 pounds of suspicious feline. "He's vibrating," Robert said nervously as Jasper emitted a low, continuous growl. "That's his warning setting," Clara explained cheerfully. "Like a car alarm. Just back away slowly and he'll stop." The mailman, Carlos, had perhaps the most complicated relationship with Jasper. The Bobcat had somehow decided that Carlos was both a daily intruder and a necessary evil. Every afternoon at 2 p.m., Jasper would station himself at the front window, tail twitching with anticipation. "Here comes your nemesis," Clara would announce, and Jasper would begin his routine. A series of chirps and clicks that sounded almost like he was lecturing Carlos through the glass. Carlos, who'd been on the route for 15 years, took it in stride. "Afternoon, Jasper," he'd call out, which would trigger a fresh round of protective noises from the Bobcat. But the most hilarious incidents happened during Clara and Mark's discussions. They weren't fighters. After 3 decades of marriage, they'd learned to navigate disagreements with humor and patience. But sometimes, voices got raised, especially during their annual debate about whether to visit Mark's mother for Thanksgiving. Mark pro, Clara con. "She served Jell-O with vegetables in it last year, Mark. Vegetables in Jell-O." It's called aspic, and it's a classic. Jasper appeared between them like a referee in a boxing match, fixing Mark with a stare that could melt steel. "I'm not arguing," Mark protested. "I'm discussing." Jasper's ear tufts twitched skeptically. "Tell him, Clara, we're just talking about Thanksgiving." Clara bent down to scratch behind Jasper's ears. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's just defending his mother's crimes against food." "See, that's not helping," Mark pointed out, but he was smiling. It was hard to stay annoyed when you had a Bobcat mediator. The situation reached peak absurdity during their grandson's birthday party. 2-year-old Mason was the apple of everyone's eye, including, surprisingly, Jasper's. The Bobcat had accepted the toddler immediately, perhaps recognizing a fellow small creature in need of protection. The problem arose when Mason decided Grandma Clara needed to see his new fire truck. The toddler barreled across the yard at full speed, toy raised high, yelling, "Gamma! Gamma! Wook!" To Jasper, this looked like a very small, very loud person charging at his person with a weapon. The Bobcat intercepted Mason about 3 feet from Clara, not aggressively, but by simply placing his large body in the toddler's path. Mason bounced off Jasper like he'd hit a spotted wall and landed on his diapered bottom in the grass. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Mason started giggling. "Kitty!" he announced, immediately trying to climb on Jasper's back. The Bobcat looked deeply confused. His protective instincts were shorting out. Small human was potentially threatening, but also tiny? And Clara was laughing? And now small human was patting his head? "Jasper, you can't body check the baby," Clara said through her laughter, scooping up Mason. "He's allowed to run at Grandma." Jasper made a huffing noise that sounded remarkably like disagreement but allowed Mason to pet his ears. The vet visits were another source of entertainment. Dr. Patel had been Clara's colleague for years and was one of the few people Jasper tolerated near her. Tolerated being the key word. "He's in excellent health," Dr. Patel announced after Jasper's annual exam, during which the Bobcat had growled continuously but allowed the examination for Clara's sake. "Though I've never seen a stress level quite like his. Has he considered meditation? Yoga?" "He's just very devoted," Clara said, stroking Jasper's head as he glared suspiciously at the stethoscope. "Devoted is one word for it," Dr. Patel agreed. "Obsessed might be another. Has he let Mark sleep in the bed yet?" "He's making progress," Clara said optimistically. "Last week he only growled twice when Mark got up for water." But for all the comedy, there were moments of genuine sweetness that revealed the depth of Jasper's bond with Clara. When she came down with the flu one winter, Jasper refused to leave her side. He curled up against her, purring so loudly Mark could hear it from the hallway. When Clara's temperature spiked, Jasper paced anxiously, making soft chirping noises until Mark brought her medicine. "I think he's trying to help," Mark observed, watching Jasper gently pat Clara's hand with his paw. "He's a good nurse," Clara murmured, smiling weakly. Jasper's protective instincts proved genuinely useful one evening when Clara was gardening alone. An aggressive stray dog had wandered into the yard, growling and advancing on Clara. Before she could even call for help, Jasper appeared, placing himself between her and the dog. The sound he made wasn't his usual warning growl. It was something primal and terrifying, a reminder that he was, at heart, a wild predator. The dog took one look at Jasper in full defensive mode and fled. Jasper maintained his guard position until he was certain the threat was gone, then turned to Clara with what could only be described as "Are you okay?" expression. "My hero," Clara said, her heart still racing. Jasper head-bumped her leg gently, purring. Mark found them like that when he got home. Clara sitting in the garden with Jasper sprawled protectively across her lap. "Dog trouble?" he guessed, reading the situation. "Jasper handled it," Clara said, scritching the Bobcat's chin. "Didn't you, my brave boy?" Jasper opened one eye to ensure Mark was maintaining appropriate distance, then resumed purring. As the years passed, Jasper's protectiveness evolved but never diminished. He developed specific protocols for different situations. Delivery drivers got the window treatment, aggressive chirping but no actual confrontation. Repair technicians required constant supervision, with Jasper following them room to room. The pool cleaner had earned special status after bringing Jasper a toy mouse, though he still wasn't allowed within 6 feet of Clara. The house cleaners, Maria and her daughter Rosa, had perhaps the best arrangement. They'd learned to announce themselves loudly. "Hello, Mr. Jasper. We're here to clean." This would trigger what Clara called Jasper's inspection routine. He'd walk them through the house, showing them what they could clean, everything except Clara's immediate vicinity. "He's like a fuzzy supervisor," Rosa laughed, watching Jasper oversee her mopping with great seriousness. The holidays brought special challenges. Thanksgiving meant a house full of people, all potential threats to Clara's safety. Jasper would position himself strategically, usually on the arm of Clara's chair, where he could survey the entire room. He'd learned to tolerate the family, Jennifer and her husband. Todd had eventually won him over with years of patient bribery. Their son Mason, Clara's other daughter Patricia and her family. But he watched them all with the intensity of a Secret Service agent. "Does he ever relax?" Patricia's husband James asked, unnerved by Jasper's unblinking stare. "This is him relaxed," Mark assured him. "You should see him when the doorbell rings." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Jasper launched himself from the chair with surprising grace for his size, reaching the door before anyone else. His warning growl started before the door even opened. It was the pizza delivery driver, a teenage boy who looked terrified by the sounds emanating from inside the house. "Just leave it on the porch," Clara called out, wrestling Jasper back. "Thank you." The family dissolved into laughter as Jasper supervised the pizza box's journey from porch to kitchen, growling softly the entire time. But perhaps the most touching display of Jasper's devotion came during a health scare. Clara had been experiencing dizzy spells and finally agreed to see a cardiologist. The tests revealed an irregular heartbeat. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but requiring monitoring and medication. The night before her procedure to implant a small monitor, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, trying to read but mostly worrying. Jasper appeared silently, as he always did, and did something unusual. Instead of his typical protective positioning, he climbed carefully into her lap, all 30 pounds of him, and began to purr. It wasn't his usual rumbling purr. This was softer, almost melodic. He pressed his forehead against her chest, right over her heart, and continued that gentle, soothing vibration. Clara felt her anxiety begin to ease. "You know, don't you?" she whispered, stroking his spotted coat. "You always know." Mark found them there in the morning, Clara asleep in the chair with Jasper still curled in her lap, maintaining his healing purr. For once, the Bobcat didn't growl when Mark approached. He simply looked up, blinked slowly, a cat's kiss, and resumed his vigil. The procedure went smoothly, but Jasper's behavior in the following weeks was remarkable. He seemed to sense when Clara's heart rhythm was off, often before she felt it herself. He'd appear at her side, chirping insistently until she sat down and took her medication. "He's better than the monitor," Clara told Dr. Patel during a follow-up visit. "Yesterday, he started fussing right before I had an episode." "Animals can sense these things," Dr. Patel agreed. "Though I've never seen such dedication. Has he applied to medical school?" The comment was meant as a joke, but it highlighted something profound about Jasper's behavior. His protectiveness wasn't just instinct. It was gratitude transformed into action. Every growl, every defensive stance, every suspicious glare at Mark was Jasper's way of repaying what he saw as an unpayable debt. This became even clearer during what Mark later called the Great Raccoon Siege. A family of raccoons had decided the Miller's Deck was an excellent location for their nightly gatherings. They were loud, messy, and utterly unimpressed by human attempts to discourage them. Jasper took this as a personal affront. These masked bandits were potential threats to Clara's territory, and he would not stand for it. He began a nightly patrol, stationing himself at the sliding glass door like a very spotted sentry. The raccoons, for their part, seemed to find Jasper fascinating. They would approach the glass, standing on their hind legs to get a better look at him. Jasper would puff up to maximum size, growling warnings that the raccoons completely ignored. "It's like West Side Story out there," Mark commented one evening, watching the standoff. "If they start snapping their fingers, I'm calling animal control." The situation escalated when the largest raccoon, Clara had named him Bandit, discovered he could make Jasper absolutely furious by pressing his tiny hands against the glass. Jasper would launch himself at the door, yowling with frustration. "You're being trolled by a raccoon," Clara told Jasper, trying not to laugh. "You know that, right?" Jasper gave her a look that clearly said this was no laughing matter. The security of the household was at stake. The conflict resolution came unexpectedly. During a particularly intense stare-down, 2-year-old Mason toddled over to see what Jazzy was doing. The toddler pressed his own tiny hands against the glass, mimicking the raccoon. Bandit, apparently charmed by this miniature human, chittered and patted the glass in return. Jasper looked from Mason to the raccoon and back again, his expression one of utter bewilderment. The small human was communicating with the enemy? But small human was under his protection? But enemy was making small human giggle? "I think you broke him," Jennifer laughed, watching Jasper try to process this development. From that night on, Jasper's approach to the raccoons changed. He still watched them, but with less hostility and more confusion. They'd somehow been reclassified from threats to those weird things that amused the small human. He'd still growl if they got too rowdy, but it was half-hearted, more of a keep it down out there than a real warning. As Jasper entered his senior years, his protectiveness mellowed but never disappeared. He moved a bit slower, slept a bit more, but his devotion to Clara remained absolute. He'd still growl when Mark approached the bed, though now it was more of a grumbling complaint than a real threat. He still supervised visitors, though he'd sometimes doze off mid-surveillance. "He's like a grumpy old security guard," Mark observed one evening, watching Jasper half-heartedly growl at the TV during a particularly exciting 49ers game. "He's perfect," Clara corrected, kissing the white fur that had begun to appear around Jasper's muzzle. The day they had to say goodbye came too soon, as it always does. Jasper had developed kidney problems, common in older cats. They'd managed it with medication and special food for a while, but eventually it became clear he was suffering. Dr. Patel came to the house. There was no way Clara was making Jasper spend his last moments in a scary clinic. He lay in his favorite spot on Clara's side of the bed, surrounded by family. Even Todd was there, the boyfriend turned son-in-law whom Jasper had never quite approved of but had learned to tolerate. "You've been the best guardian anyone could ask for," Clara whispered, stroking his graying fur. "The very best boy." Jasper managed one last purr, weak but unmistakable. His amber eyes found Clara's face and held her gaze as Dr. Patel administered the sedative. Even at the end, he was watching over her. The house felt empty without Jasper's constant presence. No growling at bedtime, no supervision during meals, no furry roadblock between Clara and potential threats. Mark could approach his own bed without announcement, but found himself missing the nightly negotiation. "I keep expecting to hear him," Mark admitted one evening, finding Clara crying quietly in the garden. "He gave us 12 years, Clara said, leaning into her husband's embrace. 12 years of ridiculous, over-the-top, wonderful protection. Remember when he tried to arrest the plumber?" Mark asked, successfully drawing a watery laugh from his wife. "Or when he bodyguarded me from that butterfly?" To be fair, it was a very large butterfly. They stood together, remembering their spotted guardian, when Clara noticed movement by the garden shed. A small, striped form emerged, a tiny kitten mewing pitifully. "Oh no," Mark said, recognizing the look on his wife's face. "Clara, no." "It's just a regular kitten," Clara said, already moving toward it. "Probably dumped. Look how thin it is." The kitten, as if sensing a soft touch, wobbled directly to Clara and collapsed at her feet, purring despite its obvious distress. "It's purring," Clara said wonderingly. "Just like—" "It's not a bobcat," Mark pointed out. "That's a regular cat. It'll be normal. No growling at me, no bodyguarding, no holding me hostage in my own bedroom." Clara scooped up the kitten, who immediately snuggled into her neck. "We'll see," she said, carrying it toward the house. Mark followed, shaking his head but smiling. "What are you going to name it?" Clara looked down at the kitten, who was watching her with bright amber eyes. "Jasper," she said softly. "Jasper the Second." "Of course you are," Mark sighed. As they entered the house, neither of them noticed the kitten's eyes tracking Mark's movement, or the tiny growl it made when he got too close to Clara. But they would. Oh, they would. Because love, whether from a 30-pound bobcat or a 2-pound kitten, always finds a way to protect what matters most. And in the Miller household, what mattered most was the woman who opened her heart to creatures in need, who saw beyond wild instincts to the soul beneath, who understood that sometimes the fiercest love comes with fangs and growls and an absolutely ridiculous level of devotion. Jasper II settled into Clara's arms, purring like a tiny motor, already planning his security protocols. He had big paw prints to fill, but something in his amber eyes suggested he was up for the challenge. After all, every Clara needs a guardian, and every guardian, no matter how small, needs a Clara to guard. Mark looked at the kitten, then at his wife, and smiled. "Here we go again," he said. And honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way.